My name is Mahan Kulasekram, and on behalf of the Wilson Center, let me welcome you to the Hodges Symposium. As many of you know, this symposium is held annually in honor of our former director and current academic leader at University Health Network, Brian Hodges, and we're very pleased that he's able to attend. And he always attends these events, so thank you. He's a very busy man, and so we um, really appreciate his input and the opportunity to honor the impact that he's had at medical education, health professions education, and in the translation of evidence to practice in our academic work. Before I go any further, I'd like to invite one of our senior PhD fellows, Abigail Ramdawar, to offer the land acknowledgement.
Good morning, everyone. I have the privilege of doing our land acknowledgement this morning. We would like to acknowledge the sacred land on which the University Health Network operates. It has been a site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and agreement with the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, this meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. On a personal note, as the daughter of immigrants and a first-generation Canadian, I reflect on my education at the Wilson Center and the University of Toronto. Over the past 4 years, as learners and collaborators, we have had the incredible opportunity to engage with Indigenous health research methodologies. These have included principles such as respect, community-based participatory research, relationality, reciprocity, and responsibility in research collaboration. These ways of seeing and knowing and understanding are not only foundational in building meaningful relationships and part of a beautiful exchange and knowledge co-creating, but also essential in challenging assumptions and fostering solutions, innovation, and creativity within our healthcare system. For these resources, we are deeply grateful for the opportunity to lean in, learn, and be part of a knowledge exchange. And it is with sincere thank you to the Indigenous peoples across Canada for their generous hearts and spirits in sharing these resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. That was very thoughtful and I think a good reminder of some of the reasons why we're gathered here today. Before I introduce Dr. Cynthia Whitehead, our director, just a few elements of housekeeping. So today is a hybrid event. So we have some colleagues and friends joining us virtually, which means that I'm going to do my best to engage them. So people in Zoom land, hello, you can see me, I suppose, and hopefully you're able to see the rest of the room. It's quite full. What we're going to do to invite your engagement is to ask you to put comments and questions in the chat, and then I'll be able to review them and then pass them on to our speaker today. For those of you who've just joined us, there's coffee and food at the back, and bathrooms are out the door and to your left, and another left, just before the elevators. And with that, let me introduce our director, Dr. Cynthia Whitehead. Cynthia is a senior scientist at the Wilson Center, a professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, as well as the BMO chair holder at University Health Network. Please welcome Cynthia to the stage.
Thanks so much, Mahan, and welcome everyone. We are so glad you are here with us in person and online. I'd like to thank Mahan for chairing the organizing committee and everyone who has worked really hard to make this event possible. I just get to stand here and welcome you. The real work happens by many other people. Cheryl, will you please stand up? So most of you probably know Cheryl as the coordinator of all of our learning programs. She has now taken on a much bigger role managing all the operations of the Wilson Center. And she's doing a fabulous job with all of that. And I'm so appreciative, Cheryl, of everything that you're doing. Next, Jane, please stand up. Jane, who is our new business officer. She started with us late last year. And if you want to talk to anyone about learning really fast and really well, Jane is an exemplar. It is extraordinary. What the Wilson Center is a complicated place financially, and she has gotten a handle on it in an incredibly short time. So Jane, thank you so much for being part of our community. Anyone who has not met Jane, please meet her at the break in the networking session. We want you, Jane, to feel very much a part of our community. So again, welcome to everyone. Thanks to Brian for lending his name to the event. Thank you for being here in person. Thank you for being here online. Our Wilson Center community really values the way we come together very thoughtfully and reflect on things together and respectfully think about how we can have collegial conversations while talking about tough stuff. And so that is really the ethos that I think is most important to the Wilson Center. And I encourage all of us to embrace that ethos here today. To help us with that, Mariana, please stand up. Mariana left us after 42 years at the University of Toronto at the end of December. While she's in our hearts and minds every day, she's not with us so much on a practical day-to-day basis, but Mariana, most of you will know as one of the most important people in the entire history of the Wilson Center for fostering that sense of community, of being together in good ways. So Mariana, you also, she's here for hugs. Anyone who would like or need a hug today, Mariana has been known, in addition to her amazing skills running an academic center and taking care of all the finances, for just being the wonderful person she is. So welcome back, Mariana. And with that, again, really looking forward to this day. Tasha, thank you for coming. Mahan's going to do a much bigger introduction, but we are so fortunate to have Tasha Wyatt here with us today. So I'll hand it back to you, Mahan, to introduce her.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and a hand for Cynthia for her support and an engagement with this event. We can't do it without her leadership. I'm really personally grateful for that. The theme for today's event is about advocacy, activism, and how we think about professionalism in this context. And some of you may know the atelier has been happening this past week. The facilitators have done a great job, and they kindly asked me to speak about a topic that I know much about, which is my own research journey. And I was reflecting, I've actually never taken a course in education or health professions education. In case my bosses are here, it's too late. You already gave me the job. But I did take one course. It was an audited course, and Brian taught it. It was about Foucault, and I learned so much. And one of the things I think that was a misconception for me, at least, was the idea that Foucauldian theory was abstract. It was not really engaged with the world. And Brian actually talked a bit about Foucault's own personal activism in France and changing the penal code, and how his work has been used to transform many of the things that were taken for granted at that time. And I think he's also used that same perspective in advancing our field. So it's quite fitting that we have a current scholar in that area to advance our thinking, to spur some conversation, and to provoke us to think about how we can address this issue in our complex and challenging times in healthcare, in society, and in the wider world. And so it is a great delight for me to introduce Dr. Tasha Wyatt. Tasha is well known to our community. She's been a visiting scholar and has come to the Wilson Center quite a few times, and it's always a delight to run into her in any context. Tasha, in her formal role, is the Vice Chair of Research at the Department of Health Professions Education at the Uniformed Services University. She's a trained education psychologist in cross-cultural psychology, and her interests include the study of race, ethnicity, and culture, and the ways these elements intersect with educational systems. She's currently studying areas of research that are diverse, such as critical perspectives of professional identity formation, of racially minoritized physicians, strategies for professional resistance in medicine, and the control of others' time as a form of oppression in medical education. And of course, I think my calendar needs to learn about that. So thank you so much, Tasha, for joining us, and please welcome her to the stage.
I can't even talk. I'm so excited to be here. It's very perfunctory to say that I feel very honored to be here, but I really do. And I'm just going to start with a very short story. I came into medical education 10 years ago, and I was at the Medical College of Georgia. And I came in to sign my contract. It was my very first day, and my department chair said, what is your vision for your career in medical education? And I was thinking, I just need to figure out what UME is, GME, what do these things stand for? Like, I have no aspirations to do anything. I'm doing this for a year. I was pulled out of being a housewife in the suburbs. We had just moved to Georgia and I had no job. And he's asking me my vision for my career in medical education. I had no answer. Well, he obviously recognized that I had no answer. And he slammed his hand down and he said, "You want to be the director of the Wilson Center." Which I had heard nothing about. It was my first day. But I tell you this story, one, because you have an incredible reputation, but two, that day I started researching the Wilson Center because obviously I needed to be the director. And I thought to myself, these are my people. These are the people that are doing really deep research and really probing into issues in medical education that we need to be thinking about. And so I'm so honored to be here, not as the director, but as a keynote speaker for the Brian Hodges Symposium. And I just really appreciate the invitation. Now, Cynthia, I know you're going to retire someday. I do not want your job because as a federal employee in the United States, I'm doing quite well right now. I do have somebody on my left that I think is trying to give me something. So just a second. Good. Okay, great. So let me begin by pointing out the obvious. My institution isn't on my slide. And that is because I do work for the federal government. I am here, however, as a private citizen. So this is Tasha Wyatt's views and does not represent the government's views. I have taken all legal precautions. I'm here on personal leave and I've signed legal paperwork so that anything I say today cannot be used against me. And I can assure you that it would be, given the political environment at the moment. So I am just Tasha Wyatt here. The second thing that I want to talk about is I had anticipated a panel today, which is fine that they're not here, but some of the areas I'm doing flyovers because I had the privilege of knowing what everybody else was going to speak about. So I'm not going in depth. My role was actually to set the stage for the panel. So I apologize if it seems like I'm not going too far in depth in some of these issues. We can also make this up in Q&A and the wider discussion that we're going to have. So before we begin, some of you may not be familiar with me. Those that are know some of my background story around this. I grew up in Hawaii in the 1970s and 1980s, and this was a time of great political and cultural revolution. There was an awareness that was coming about regarding the colonial past that Hawaii has. And I only learned very recently, I thought that this was statewide, and if not statewide, island-wide. I grew up on Maui, but it wasn't. And I thought that it was maybe school-wide. And I just learned it was the specific teachers that I had in grade school who talked to us about being an activist and the important role that we play, particularly as white folks, to work on behalf of the Native Hawaiians in trying to decolonialize the culture, language, and history of the Hawaiian people. So I say all of this to you because I don't just come to this topic as an academic. This is something that I've been thinking about since I was about 7 years old. And so what you're going to do today is hear a little bit about my perspective on these issues. So I'm going to cover 3 areas. So advocacy and activism, what the difference is, what considerations must be made concerning boundaries around these areas, and how do we shape activist behaviors. And I'm talking about these 3 things, not because I want to give you an academic talk, but I want to start to pave a way forward on where we go next, given that advocacy and activism is on all of our minds. So I want to sort of call forth a future for us as a community. Part 1. Positioning, advocacy, and activism. The first question that I think we need to talk about as a community is, should we be training physicians to be glorified sponges, endlessly absorbing system failures and patient suffering until they are squeezed dry of their own humanity and sense of agency? Is this what we want? Should they be made to suppress their moral distress to be an ideal professional? I think we can all agree that the answer is no. We do not want this for our physicians. I think this contributes to burnout, a sense of moral distress, and a lack of agency within our community. But then the question is, what do we do about this? So how do we help trainees engage in advocacy and activism in ways that are appropriate, in ways that we feel are accepted by our community? For simplicity's sake, because I knew I was going to have a panelist that was going to go into depth on this, I'm going to talk about advocacy as working within the system. It's internally focused. And it's trying to change the structures and influence decisions and practices. It focuses on speaking, supporting, or pleading on behalf of an individual or group. It is fairly anodyne, in my view, compared to other forms of trying to create change in medical education. This might include lobbying, supporting patients, professional organization engagement, and things that we all recognize as something that we want physicians to do. Advocacy requires that physicians strategically use and leverage their authority, credibility to affect some kind of tangible outcome. So In the Canadian context, you talk about advocacy quite a bit. It's in your CanMeds framework, which I'm so relieved every time I come up here that this is part of the discourse in the Canadian context. We hardly ever talk about this in the American context. And Maria Hubinet talks a lot about this and publishes on this in terms of workarounds and going above and beyond and sort of the problems with these kinds of actions in our system. In part because they are temporary fixes. These are things that can have consequences if you carry them forward into the system. But they have a place in medical education. So for example, in the American context, this might include a physician filling out a form, stretching the truth to be able to get coverage for certain kind of treatment that wouldn't otherwise be authorized by an insurance company. Activism, from my perspective, involves direct, vigorous, and often unconventional actions that challenge the status quo and bring about change. It often works outside of established systems to draw public attention and create a sense of urgency. So we can think about this in terms of protests, demonstrations, boycotts, strikes, and the like. We saw an uptick in activism with the murder of George Floyd in 2020. It was always there, but it became much more present in our daily lives. I don't know if you're aware, there is a beautiful database that's actually monitored by the US military. It's called the Armed Conflict and Location and Events database, ACLED for short. They track conflict around the world at any given moment. So they partnered with the different newspapers and media outlets. So you get real-time information around conflict. So yes, this is about war, but it's also about protest and demonstrations, and you can filter by health workers. And so I can tell you that in the last 4 years, Lucy. Sorry, it's an inside joke. The older I get, I confuse minutes, years, and everything else related to time. So for the last 4 years, this has been increasing on a daily basis. And so it's very much a part of our current time. Now, the key differences between the two, from my perspective, is that advocacy is very internally focused within the systems. Activism is focused externally to raise awareness about issues. This is not to say that you can't have loud, extraordinary acts of advocacy, and you can't have quiet, subterranean forms of activism. You absolutely can. But I'm making this simple to set up my arguments for today, and also because I anticipated that we were going to go more in depth into these issues. So in setting the stage, I have a question. Why is it that medical education appears to implicitly endorse advocacy while penalizing activism? What is it about activism that makes the profession uncomfortable? Have you given this thought at all? Does anybody have any suggestions on why that might be? This is a real question. Does anybody have any thoughts? Yeah, so Nancy said that the profession is acts as gatekeepers. Yeah, it's a solid, dense thing that has edges and boundaries and things like that. So to move outside of it feels very uncomfortable. Okay, any other thoughts? Are you at least having private thoughts? Okay.
Questionable history. Science has a long, questionable claim to neutrality.
Mm. Yeah, so science, I don't know if you heard the first part, has a long history of neutrality. Staying out of it. Okay, I can't keep track. This is great. Tina?
Profession as a whole might not be the interests of the individuals who are doing the advocacy at the individual level.
So the collective and the individual might have very different interests. Great, over here.
Hierarchical.
Yeah.
And doctors benefit from that status quo of keeping the hierarchy as it is. And so it's a challenge to medicine because of that upholding of the status quo and of class systems, because they're part of it and they're considered slightly upper middle class as well. Advocating for people who are struggling in society can kind of challenge some of that status.
Great. And then Ayala, I know you've had your hand up.
Thanks. So focusing, I think, a little less on the people doing the activism or advocacy and focusing on other people who might be affected by it. I think that one of the side effects of either advocacy or activism is the effects on the patients we care for. And maybe I'll speak as a physician rather than as a researcher, but that if there is a patient who is uncomfortable seeking care, then are we doing our duty as professionals? And therefore, perhaps one of the reasons that doing things that the way you've set it up here, and I don't, we can argue about definitions of advocacy and activism, but you've set up advocacy as something that is done within the profession to move patient care forward, and activism is something that is done to make noise. And so if as a patient, which of those is going to make me comfortable seeking care from that provider, which I would argue is the core of why we have doctors.
So we're breaking rank, and we might make patients uncomfortable because we're not staying sort of within the roles that traditionally physicians were supposed to play. Yes, Brett.
I suppose I'm going to say, I want to ask you a question, which beyond the obvious that this is a health professions education symposium, why focus here on medical education as if that is unique about medical education?
Sorry, I don't think I got the question.
So the question is, why does medical education appear to implicitly endorse advocacy while penalizing activism? And my question to you is, why medical education? Is that unique or something special about medical education? Or is it something more general? Or maybe thinking like in terms of sociologically, is it bigger than medical education? Is this a reflection of something else, not medical education?
Sure, so something in our professions. As
Or-
an example.
Yeah,
Or in
something.
society.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had thoughts about that.
Not that I want to go into right now, but we can continue later on this topic. Well, there's multiple reasons. You clearly thought about this and you've come up with some really good ideas. Oh, did we have another question, Mahan? Sure. I mean, I think I have all the time in the world now.
Thank you. In responding to this prompt, I'm very interested in it from a Foucauldian lens. You brought up Foucault, I'm so sorry. From the question of medical education is fundamentally breeding part of the state, and the state controls and orders patients, it orders clients, it moves people around into boxes of defined categories that are easy to understand, they're easy to keep. And when we order certain types of people and order especially people who we don't value for their labor or value for their capacity to produce endlessly for the state, we have to maintain that strength and that iron grip of control that if we are medical professionals or involved in the training of them, we have to keep that line of control. And so that's a lot of it.
Doesn't it always come back to control? Okay, so we're going to pause on this and continue talking, which is great. Yeah.
I was just going to say the idea that the implicit endorsement of advocacy and the penalization of activism exists pervasively and diffusively in society is probably true, but it's probably exaggerated in a medical education context because of the professional standards, the traits that are standards in medicine, like stoicism, restraint, sterility, whiteness, cleanliness, are very hostile towards vigor and urgency and emotion involved in activism.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thanks. What makes me uncomfortable about this concept of activism in the profession of medicine, and I'm speaking as a physician, is that it suggests that there is a right and wrong, which I'm not going to get into that philosophical argument, but when our role is to take care of everyone, how does that tension exist with this possibility that there's a right and a wrong, and take a side, take a stance, and how do you do that while caring for everyone in society? And I think that as we go through our careers, we come to realize that there's a lot more nuance, and that this concept of right and wrong, while it's incredibly important on an individual basis when we care for individuals, we have that person and their families and everyone in front of us, that what's right for them might not be what's right for someone else. And how do we hold that when we have these grand statements? And
Yeah. So masks. Yeah. Okay. Good. So again, lots of reasons why this might be. The one that I have been thinking about has to do with the community. So part 2, in defense of the professional community. A profession is a collective, and being a member of this collective involves some degree of submission to its will and its values. If an individual steps outside of professional propriety, then the professional has stepped out of their professional role. They're then acting as a citizen. So I make the distinction that if you are engaged in activism and you are concerned with issues of the collective, patient care, hospital systems, these sorts of things, then you are an activist as a physician, as a professional. But as soon as you move outside of that realm, then you're moving into individual private citizen territory. And I make that distinction because it can be very muddy when you have issues that don't have to do with the profession, but you use credibility and stature and standing as a physician to create awareness about other issues. But we have responsibility to the collective that we're a part of, and that's what makes us a profession. So I know not everybody would agree with this statement, so I want you to just kind of sit with it as we continue. And I think, Tina, you brought up the idea that when an individual speaks on on behalf of the collective, their views, their opinions, their assertions might be their own. It does not represent the rest of the community, the physician community. The public doesn't know that. They have no idea, which gets into the issues that I think Ayelet brought up. So if patients are uncomfortable with these loud, extraordinary events that seems like they're breaking with rank, you can have issues with patient care, which is what the public believes physicians should be concerned about. However, where I get stuck and I start to think in other realms that have no answers is around this question. When is maintaining public trust a genuine ethical imperative? And when does it become a convenient excuse for inaction and self-preservation? I don't know where that line is, and I'm bothered by the fact that I don't know. So this is something that I would like to talk about with all of you, and we can do this in the Q&A. If you want to have a brief conversation right now, that would be good too. Do you have private thoughts on this that you want to share? Mahan, you have private thoughts on this that you want to share? Okay, sounds good. And then I get caught on this question. Who defines public trust? And whose trust are we prioritizing? I think back here we talked about the affluent, the politically connected, the historically privileged. I think that's the community that we think of when we think of the public. But that is deeply, deeply problematic, and it hasn't served us well in some areas. We are self-regulating, which is wonderful, but we have essentially not done well by certain patient populations because we defined trust and the public in one particular way. This question has haunted me right after I was trying to figure out how to be the director of the Wilson Center. So that was key. I had to try to figure that out. And then as I started thinking about my new career in medical education, this is what sits with me, and this is what keeps me up at night. In part because I am wondering why we're not prioritizing trustworthiness over trust. Trust, I think, helped us get to this point where we are autonomous, where we have this privilege in society, where we can self-regulate, all of these things. But I think we need to now think about trustworthiness. And if we're not thinking about this, I think we're missing something completely. If we're not thinking about trustworthiness and physicians' ability to identify problems in the system and then go and fix them, then perhaps we don't actually deserve public trust. We should be thinking of ourselves as trustworthy, as responsive to society, responsive to patients' needs. That's what we should be thinking about, because it communicates that the profession is interested in change and meeting the needs of society. I'm sure you were all following the South Korean resident and student protests. So those of you that weren't, in February 2024, the government suggested that they were going to open up, or they proposed opening up many slots for new medical students, which would drastically increase the number of physicians in the country, which is sorely needed because there's 2.6 physicians for every 1,000 patients. So obviously they're understaffed. However, the medical students and the residents, in seeing so many problems with the way the healthcare system is run in South Korea, decided that that wasn't going far enough, that just merely expanding the number of slots isn't going to improve the system. And I don't know if you follow South Korean medical care, but they have had lots of strikes over the years. And this is just one of many trying to raise awareness of how broken the system is. However, what eventually happened is they were painted as self-serving, unprofessional, and greedy by the government and media and everything else. So in trying to take care of the and not maintain just a perspective on public trust and keeping that sort of at the forefront, they were trying to demonstrate that they were trustworthy and that they were fighting on the public's behalf. It completely backfired. And so part of doing protest is making sure that you frame your message very clearly, because if you don't, other people will do it for you. And so if I have one lesson for you, if you're an activist, you need to do that. So trust and trustworthiness. I don't think we need to focus on public trust anymore. We need to focus on trustworthiness. Part 3, the need for standards. Currently, we have standards for any number of things: for patient care, interacting with colleagues, social and fiscal probity, yet we don't have standards for activism. This is a huge opportunity to begin to shape behaviors among trainees who are going to engage in these behaviors anyway. This is absolutely the next step for us as a community to move forward. For those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of professional resistance. Rachel Ellaway and I have been working on this concept for the last 3-4 years. And we define professional resistance as individual and collective expressions of condemnation of social harms and injustices with the intent of stopping them, preventing them from recurring, and holding those responsible to account. It has much to do with activism. The difference is professional resistance is about undermining and challenging power. Activism isn't necessarily engaged with that goal in mind. Usually it's to raise awareness and bring attention to particular issues. Professional resistance is about undermining power and those that have it, that are wielding it in ways that are unjust. It has little to do with deviance, but a great deal to do with moral and political indignation. So this moral distress that I talked about at the very beginning. But in a profession that demands standards, chains of obedience, and hierarchical structure to maintain patient safety, there's reasons for all of this. It is a tough sell to bring professional resistance into medical education. And therefore, it remains largely illegitimate at the moment in medical education. However, resistance is about going against the tide, which is acceptable. Not everybody has the same thoughts, views, and opinions. It's about slowing, stopping, blocking, or protesting something. It is about asserting autonomy, identity, values, and responsibilities. And it's about risking freedom, employment, respect, just like activism does. And so we developed 5 principles that I want to share with you, because I think these principles can help guide the standards that we create in the profession. The first one is that any kind of activism, professional resistance, should be for something, not just against something. You have to frame what it is you want to be able to communicate that clearly with the public, with the profession, with the people that you're interacting with. Nobody wants to hear your complaints. Nobody cares. But if you can demonstrate that you are trying to uphold or put forward or support certain ideas, then people can start to gather around those ideas and think about them in the ways that you're thinking about them. It needs to be deliberate and intentional. It should be undertaken with a sense of presence. So a lot of activism will come out with people being very angry and displaying their emotion in ways that isn't intentional and deliberate. And I hate to tell you, but that's really a turnoff for other people. It scares them. They don't know what to do with that raw energy. But if you undertake your resistance in a very deliberate way, then it appears as if you're open for discussion. It needs to be proportionate. So a disagreement or some kind of a conflict that somebody has does not need to elevate to the point of a social media campaign. The reaction that is given needs to be proportionate to the conflict that you're addressing. And the reason that this is important is because the stakes are so high. You do not want to risk your ability to work in the system by getting kicked out. And that is what some of the sanctions are. You have to be proportionate to the conflict that you're experiencing. And it needs to be constructive. Again, it's not about airing issues of discontent. It's about coming together and trying to find solutions to try to fix the issue. Otherwise, what is the point? And you need to be accountable for your actions, for the words that you say. And it needs to be whatever form of activism and resistance that you're engaged in needs to reflect professional standards. And so we have provided these guidelines to begin thinking about and talking about standards for activism so that we can begin to train our trainees to work within these boundaries. They provide a sort of foundation. These standards need to be woven into policy. They need to be upheld. They need to be modeled and exemplified in the profession. It is not just in UME, medical education students. It needs to go all the way up into GME, into professional committees, clinical practice, and into our boards. It needs to go across so that everybody has an idea of what these boundaries are and what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And the reason is because when somebody is engaged in activism, they don't know where the boundaries are. And so if we don't reinforce this and communicate it, how are they supposed to know? Can we really hold them accountable when we haven't taught them and painted a red line for them to work within? And after we agree upon standards, we're just proposing these. There can be others, they can be modified or completely different. We need to identify who should decide whether these standards have been followed or breached. And I know this will be conflictual. Who is going to make these decisions? Professionalism committees can add the standards for professional resistance activism to those already in place for professional standards. But we also need cooperation, again, from our professional societies, our licensing boards, our schools, credentialing committees, these kinds of things. These committees would be responsible for deciding whether the effort was within their professional role, right? Are you working on behalf of the profession, on behalf of the community, or are you working for yourself? Whether it was done professionally or the form of activism was unprofessional, and whether it was self-serving or on behalf of the collective. These are the kinds of questions that we need some sort of external group to be able to help us make decisions around. So in short, there are red lines for activism, but the burden is on us. We are the white coats who must paint the red line. We cannot ask our trainees to stop at a red line because we haven't given it to them yet. We need to get ahead of these events because they are not going away. If you look at the ACLID data, if you just look around your community in health professions, it's going to continue. And we need to provide some sort of guardrails for our trainees so they know where the boundaries are and they can operate it safely with minimizing their risk. Presently, we punish our trainees for infractions, which is not fair. And at this point, we're living in an apocalyptic political climate. And so I think that we're going to need more activism moving forward. And so the next step in what we're doing is to make sure that we're ensuring that it's safe, it has minimal risk, and that these activists with their, oh, I was going to say big and beautiful. Gosh, I'm never using those words again, that these trainees are part of the collective because we need that energy to continue to shift our profession. A profession that does not grow, a profession that does not identify what needs to be fixed and addressed is a dead profession. We need activism, but we also need to make sure that they're doing it safely and minimizing their risks. So with that, we are going to open it up for Q&A. I think I'm going to stand here. Yeah, because of the microphone and those online. Oh, sure. That would be great.
So Tasha, just to say, there is going to be a search for my job starting within the next year. So it's still not out of the question.
Okay. I might not have a job next year, so that might be good timing.
Go ahead, Brian, please.
Thank you so much, Tasha. A couple of comments, and there really is a question. We're accused in the Wilson Center of often asking a 15-minute question where the question is the last 5 seconds. I did want to acknowledge and thank you for this. You didn't really speak about it, but as I told you in the preamble, we're really aware here that many of our colleagues internationally are particularly suffering personally from the difficulties of having whole areas of science become off limits for conversations. So I want to thank you for being here and for a very generous and thoughtful and very welcoming and open approach to this. And I'm going to say, and I hope this is the case, that our world, we've tried to underscore civility and discourse and respect for different ideas. And I see that in what you're doing. I welcome everyone to maintain that today. Maybe that's me drawing a red line, because I, as the chief medical officer, have seen far too many examples of what I would consider behaviors that are way beyond the red line in terms of professionalism. And I think there's a subtle risk in what you're talking about, which is the profession could implode and lose trust altogether if we don't find a way to deal with that. So thank you for that. So my question, a tiny bit of history, and then I'll get to the question, which is about number 2. I love competence frameworks, and you have something about mindfulness and deliberativeness, and I'm going to come back to that, intentionality, because I want to ask you about that competence. A little bit of history quickly, though. When I did a bit of history, and Cynthia was part of this, of looking at where CanMeds came from, you know, we all love CanMeds until we don't. When the American world was taking it up and the ACGME looked at it, as you would know, they eliminated advocacy deliberately. It was taken out. And my understanding is the main reason was the accreditation bodies felt that medical schools couldn't be held to account for the social determinants of health of the communities around them. It was inconsistent with the ability of them to do it, which is a very interesting idea. So here in Canada, not perfect at all, but I'm very proud of the fact that we still have this space for advocacy and that we're debating what it is. As you pointed out, it's often very much in conflict with the other role of professionalism. Some would go as far as saying we've weaponized professionalism to try to kill advocacy.
Yeah.
So Mike, here's my question. I hope you don't mind the long preamble. If we're going to do this, and I accept very much welcome the notion you're trying to operationalize it, I think many of us as teachers are struggling. I think some of these ideas about defining which professional things and where are the lines, I can imagine. The one that I think needs some real thought, and this is maybe the community, and I would love your thoughts, is this idea of intentionality and mindfulness. So I'm going to make two scientific claims and then ask you how on earth we turn this into a competence. The first is the often used quote in our community that every way of seeing is a way of not seeing. By definition, taking a stance means to some degree, potentially being at risk of not seeing other perspectives. And Donna Haraway says that all of us can only ever have a partial perspective. I can never, ever get to a mythical place where I understand all those perspectives, i.e., I can't take a stance that includes everyone else without including everyone else in a dialogue. If I jump on social media with an opinion, I've already violated that. So my question is, from an educational point of view, a scientific point of view, as educators, it sounds great to be deliberate. You know, when I'm about to press send on my social media post, I should stop, or I should think, or I should ask a colleague. But what practically do we do with educational learners in medicine and the health professions to inculcate the competence of being deliberate and mindful and inclusive and thinking about other perspectives before simply manifesting anger and emotion?
Yeah. So I think it really comes down to the whole purpose of activism and professional resistance. It's not just a vehicle or a venue to express angry emotions. It really needs to think about that principle 4 of it being constructive. It's about finding solutions. And so part of being intentional is understanding that that is the goal, that we only have our view, it's partial, we might not represent everybody, but I'm inviting you into a conversation to step forward and engage with me so that we can work on this together. And I think that's the part of it that that we wanted to bring forth in talking about deliberateness. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody comes in and they've got stuck in traffic, or they didn't sleep well last night because they got a crying baby or something like that. And you can go off on somebody. That is not deliberate and intentional. But if you quiet your mind and think about what it is that you're trying to solve, who needs to be involved, bring them to the table and engage in discourse and dialogue around this, then I feel like that is the beginning part of trying to figure out how to move forward.
We have a question in the chat from Patricia Houston, who's the Vice Dean of Education at U of T. And she asks, how do we ensure that our faculty understand and perhaps accept this approach? They will need to model this if it is an expectation of our learners.
So how do we
ensure faculty understand and accept the approach?
Oh, yeah, training. We need to train. So Rachel and I have been going around to many conferences. Some of you have seen me at different conferences talking about this and conducting workshops, training folks on how to do this. I think that's incredibly important. The other thing that I've been doing is I have an empirical research agenda looking at trainees who are engaged in professional resistance to show people what this looks like. What are the issues? How do they engage? What are the tactics that they're using? Because I'm actually trying to create a blueprint for trainees to be able to use it in their clinical practice. So that I think is the way forward. And I do have another paper which she may be interested in. It's looking at the way faculty support trainees who are engaged in professional resistance. So what can you do if, for example, you have a trainee who's engaged in these acts? How can you support them to bring forward the issues that they're raising? Because as faculty, you are in a precarious position where you're both subservient to the institution, representative of the institution, but also in support of trainees. And so that role needs to be thought about and carried out carefully. But I have strategies for you to look up. Down somewhere over there. Oh, Tina.
Thanks, Tasha. I just want to echo what Brian has said, how difficult it is to talk about these topics and how grateful we are that you are here with us today, and not having the support of the panel to carry some of the weight of all these topics that you brought forward. So if this is not part of what you yourself are doing, what I'm about to ask, please feel free not to go into it. But I really want us to focus a little bit on method because you brought it up here, right? Proportionate and constructive. And I think that's one of the pieces that is still very contentious and being negotiated. We see how it is, we see the outcomes in the US, and we pride ourselves as not being there. But I see us on a direction that that could very possibly lead us there as well. And one of the things that has bothered me as a critical scholar for many, many years is that the methodology to bring forward the problems is not necessarily the same methodology that leads to a constructive solution. Preserving the intent of bringing forward the problems of an individual group often doesn't lead to reconciliation with the broader community. It polarizes. And we talk about it in a flippant way sometimes, oh, the effects of identity politics, but identity is what you're talking about when you say take on the role of the resistor. And we want to cultivate that. So in drawing that red line, is it to regulate the individual, or is drawing the red line needs not to be something fixed, but constantly negotiated to figure out what is constructive for all of us, not just for the group doing the advocacy,
Yeah. So
for which we're doing the advocacy, sorry.
yeah. No, the red line is should constantly be renegotiated. The ideas that we have at this present moment are going to shift as society shifts, as politics shift, as all these contextual factors play into what is deemed acceptable. And so it's got to be dynamic and fluid, which is why you need a committee to be a part of this so that they can guide the conversations around it. So that was a direct answer to your last part of the question. But I think there was another part of it that I wasn't getting because I'm American. So if you want to give me, if you want to give me an example, that would be incredibly helpful. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that's well beyond me as an individual, but I do think that that's a worthy question. It's a very philosophical question, and it's something that we need to engage with. So great. Any PhD scholars looking for a new topic?
I think this person was first.
Hi, thanks, Tasha, for your talk. It gave me a lot to think about. I think one thing I'm struggling with, and I would love to get your thoughts on, is if we have standards for resistance, does that move it from the margins to the center? And does resistance inherently have to take place from the margins?
Yeah, Rachel and I have talked about this a lot because eventually by creating standards and integrating it into the profession, it's no longer on the margins, right? It's part of our everyday practices. I think that there's always going to, I mean, to me, it's about creating a productive space. And so there's always going to be issues that are on the margins that we're going to need to discuss. The issues we're talking about today, we are not going to be talking about in 5 years. So those will always come up. But the point is that we need to make sure that we create a space where we can collectively start to think about this together. There's no end to issues on the margins.
Hi, thanks for this. And I echo the idea that this is an important conversation and a difficult one. As a physician, I am very comfortable staying inside these lines. This is my happy place, advocacy, not activism. But I have to say, I am very worried about the chill effect that the red line that you're proposing, which I understand the reasons for, but I still worry that it will have the effect of stifling important conversations and important actions by colleagues who are maybe braver than I am and are willing to take risks that I am not. And as an example, the proportionate principle, the world is burning. People are dying because of their race, their gender, their location on one or another side of a border. What is the proportional response? You use the word apocalypse. Democracy is crumbling. What is a proportional response, or what would be a disproportionate response to major crises that are affecting all of us locally and globally? And I think you raised an important question. Who gets to decide? I really have concerns about the idea, and it was mentioned before from the Foucauldian folks, that this can very easily become a matter of policing and ensuring conformity.
I hear your concerns. I mean, short of a governmental overthrow, I don't know what the appropriate response is. And it's not just in North America, it's around the globe. But those issues, I mean, the argument that I'm making is some of those larger political world issues are indeed important, and they need to be brought up because they're part of identity, our positionality, where we stand, moral distress, everything else. This is merely for professional resistance. So inside the profession, and some of those issues, I would argue, are outside the profession. They absolutely deal with us as individuals, us as human beings, and the crises that we're in, which is legitimate. But that's outside the profession. That needs its own discourse and guidelines and everything else to use your word, regulate. I do not want this to be another form of weaponization for professionalism. I really, really don't. And I am nervous about that because Medicine has a history of taking something and then standardizing it, and then it becomes fossilized, and then it's never revisited again. It just becomes part of the profession, and I do not want that. I want it to grow and continue to develop. But my concern, I don't know if I made this very clear, but I am on the side of activists, 100%. Because I want them to continue to do this work. I want them to push our thinking and to push us in ways that make us uncomfortable, and to ask those deeper questions that we do not ask, the quiet things that we do not say aloud or to each other. My fear is that medicine is so punitive that anytime somebody steps outside the bounds, they can be dismissed. And that's not right. So, like anything else, we need to be vigilant, and we need to make sure that this just doesn't become another checklist like we've done with a lot of other things, including professionalism.
Tasha, that's great. I'm going to ask a Zoom question that's related to that before I go to the in-room mic. Noor asks, what are your thoughts around silencing / negative repercussions for advocacy by medical students and residents, and maybe in this context of what you're proposing, how to mitigate that?
So when a medical student is silenced, oh, yeah. So that happens frequently. So usually when medical students bring up issues, they're framed as complaints. So going back to the idea of training, we need leaders to be trained in this as well. We have a paper that talks exactly to the 4 different strategies that leaders can use. The paper is called Those Darn Kids. And so it's about when a medical student comes, what is the appropriate response? So if a medical student is silenced, and leaders are not using the suggested ways forward that we've proposed, then they have a couple of different choices. So they can get more loud and more extraordinary. They can start to create a collective. They can also continue to be silent and say nothing, right? And so you always have to weigh the benefits and the risks in any given situation. It's not here's what you do, formulaic path forward. In doing that, what I would suggest you do is start to think about what is important to whoever has silenced you. So think about their perspective, what it is they value, what it is that they're supporting, and how you can frame what it is, the issue that you're bringing up, in a way that they can hear. So I will say that the man who hired me, who wanted me to take Cynthia's job, he said to me at the end of that talk, he said, Tasha, you are not a physician. He said, you are going to come to me and you are going to say things. I am not going to hear you. And I'll probably ignore you. And he said, what I want you to do is think about how you framed it and come back and say it again. If I don't hear you again, you have permission to come a 3rd time. And so that would be what I would suggest. It's all about the framing. Figure out how to speak the language of the person that's silencing you, so that you can begin to formulate that relationship and engage in professional resistance and enter into a constructive dialogue where solutions can be found.
Thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. I really do see the importance and the incredible viability of a framework like this. I wonder about including something that I've used in my own educational practice, which is looking very tightly at themes of urgency and really thinking through, when we're looking at professional resistance in an age of apocalypse and an age where everything feels so very urgent, is to look at the practical on the ground urgency as it affects different groups. So for example, in any training that I offer to any students at a master's level and above, regardless of the topic, I'll slip an naloxone training in there, and we will make sure that they've got some facility in recognizing signs of overdose and things like that. Even if it is only a somewhat tenuous connection to their actual reason for being there, it's 7 minutes of my time, and it is an easy way to just slip it in there before actually consulting with a large body of people. I wonder, in your framework, in a proportionate response, looking at that from the urgency of what's happening around us, because we cannot be responsible in any way, of course, for social determinants of health when you don't exist in them. But if you have a patient who's coming to you with their infant and they're trying to stretch their formula because they can't afford more formula, there's a huge urgency there that perhaps goes a little bit higher than an argument with a supervisor or losing a little bit of professional comfort. I wonder about this urgency being perhaps the leader and really pushing it forward, especially in a time when, if you are a physician, a very practical element is, yes, you might lose your employment, of course, but you are able to gain employment in a way that many people, especially people struggling in different class stratas, are not able to even access anything. So if you can offer something, why not offer it? That risk is there for you to take. You have that power. And I wonder about that being useful. And I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that. We had not thought about the idea of urgency. And so I appreciate that. I'll take it back to Dr. Ellaway. I do see some issues around that because it is a judgment call. And so I kind of have to think through the ethics around that. But I appreciate you bringing it up so that we can begin to conceptualize how it fits. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha. This is a really fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed everything you've had to say today, but also listening to all the comments that you've clearly resonated with folks and got everyone thinking. I'm curious on your comment that you would be concerned that this could turn into one of the things that medicine often does, which is create a standard and a criteria that is then weaponized against very specific people. So I'm curious about what you think we would have to do as this work moves forward to make sure that that didn't happen. There are parts of this, obviously, that are very important for maintaining professional credibility and working within a system. But I do think there are pieces that are actively pushing against what folks might need to do in other parts of their lives and the other resistance that they feel that they have to participate in. So even things like, other forms of resistance actually require that you're very clear about your emotion, your anger, and you're justified in your anger. For example, if it's your community that's under attack, if your community is fighting for empowerment. This type of model would clearly, in a standard medical kind of professional boundary world, be used to then weaponize you're not being professional because you are in fact showing your anger. So I'm curious about what you think we would have to do as this work continues to make sure that your fear didn't become a reality.
Yeah. So I don't think I can answer that personally. I think that's a conversation with our entire community. So we need more spaces like this to talk freely about these issues where we are engaged in sort of civil discourse, and that we can have different opinions and bring forth the pros and the cons to debate it. But unfortunately, advocacy and activism is pushed into a subterranean level that nobody wants to discuss because I think that it's too triggered. So that's what I would say, Nikki, is that we need to have more conversations like this. So we might need to end. No? Oh, okay. So we don't have to have standards. We don't need them. But my question to you all is, if we don't, what could we have? How do we keep these activists safe? So it's problematic, obviously, right? I mean, Annie DeFranco, if any of you know who she is, but she has a song and she says any weapon or anything you hold can be a weapon if you just hold it right. And so anything we bring into medical education can be used as a weapon against our trainees, the ones that we're trying to support. So that's honestly a problem, right? Just in general with our profession, is that we do this to our own for some reason. And I do think it comes back to that idea of control. that we don't want people to be autonomous. We want them to fall in line within the community. Anyway, we need something, even if it's not the standards.
We'll go to David and then Dean. We had a mic over there somewhere. Oh, sorry, Islet's there. Sorry about that. Islet, Dean, and then David.
Oh, okay. So Tasha, thank you for this very thought-provoking talk. I hear you, and I hear you say that you're on the side of the activists. So you work at Uniformed Services University, correct?
Correct.
And I know you're here as yourself, but I know that much of your time you are there. And I've spoken to your head of EDI at the Uniformed Services University, who tells me that there is a large orientation among many of your learners and they're not very activist learners because they're in I can't even get the acronym right. They're military physicians. But she tells me that the overall ethos in your university among many of the learners would be, if they were allowed to be activists, would be to probably be activists for things you don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
That the majority of students in your learners in your university would be right now taking activist positions that I'm pretty sure you would be very uncomfortable with about the 2S LGBTQI plus community and their being allowed to be in the military, about some of the other things that your current president is doing, for example. So are you still happy that they're being activists if their activism would be to try to kick gay people out of the military? Like, are there is activism good because it's activism? Because that's kind of what I hear you say. And I'm wondering how you would feel if the activist students decided that they were being activists for something that I'm pretty sure you wouldn't like. And there are many people in this room might take as personally threatening to them.
Yeah, so we do have quiet activism, by the way. It's you hear it in the comments of students, conversations. Trans military officers are definitely one of the issues. So the answer is yes. You cannot say activism for one group and not the other side. It has to be for both. You have to accept that it's for both. Now, whether I'm on the side of anti-trans in the military force or not, I think that they're just as capable to, as Trump wants us to do, perform lethality. That's okay for them to protest and resist among issues that I don't agree with. Because you can't choose sides, that these are the good guys, these are the ones that are on the side of the angels, and these are the ones that are the bad guys. You can't make that decision. But what I want is to create a space where we can come together and we can discuss these things. Because what often happens is we just yell at each other. We just express the anger and nothing gets done. There's no movement forward. Relationships are broken. Things don't get done. There's backstabbing. There's all kinds of fallout from this. And so we need a safe place, some sort of structure to be able to enter into these conversations. I may never, ever be convinced that trans military officers should not be in the military. But I respect their right to support their view. And I do respect that I have a right to create that space for that open dialogue, period.
Thank you, Tasha. So we'll go to Dean and then David.
Thank you. Thank you, Tasha, so much. Right when you started, I'm aware that you being here is a form of activism and you personal risk yourself too. So thank you. So it was interesting. We've talked about, and Brett, I am thinking with your comment about in terms of medical education, I'm a physiotherapist, I'm a non-physician, but it feels very much at home with health professional education and some of the challenges we've had. And I've heard Rachel present as well. And something dawned on me that we actually have a lot of activism in some of our other professionals, and sometimes the physician is a bystander. And sometimes having rallying together is actually going to be some of the power of some of these principles. And I'm thinking about constructive. To create that open dialogue, it might be a collaborative resistance because there's strength in numbers, there's strength in opinions. But then your example made me think about when you were actually speaking to your colleague and they were like, oh, you're not non-physician, come back to me. That's the other challenge is sometimes you might be the source of the resist, or you might be the resistor. So is there a receptive portion, like is this part of this, knowing that, especially physicians who have power in their position sometimes, but also are in positions of power sometimes, when they are the receiver of some of the resistance, can the strategies be used also to kind of receive that and appropriately respond to?
Yeah, all these 5 principles?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can shape the conversations that we're in to provide this space and to guide the discussions that we have. I want to come back to your idea of sort of banding together. I will say, like, I have a lot of questions that keep me up at night. And one of them doesn't come at night, it comes in the morning when I wake up over coffee, is I do not understand why collectively we have not come together around certain issues, not just interprofessionally, but intraprofessionally. I say we because I feel like I'm part of the community. I'm not a physician, but we have so much power in society to create change, but we don't use it for that benefit. And for the benefit of social harms and injustices and whatnot. And I ask myself all the time, what is it going to take to trigger this? When are we going to realize that we're much more powerful in numbers, and that when we all collectively form as one, that we can probably get some of these issues addressed? I don't see movement in that direction. And I just wonder why that is. Anyway.
Outside of the words here, I saw teams. Sorry, I just said I saw teams of many of us out there. So I was thinking that momentum was great, and now I'm like, now that it's gone, I feel like it's dissipated a bit. So yeah, something to think about.
I'm going to give the last question to David because we do need to give Tasha a break. She's been standing here for some time. So
thank you so much. I'm David Wilder. I'm one of the Wilson Center scientists. It strikes me in the articulation of the professional resistance, the one word I don't see there is patient. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you conceptualize the role of patient, the role of engaging patient, the ever evolving concept of what patient means in the notion of professional resistance.
Yeah, so patients are the center of it. The work that we do as professional resistors should be about improving patient care or access to patient care or things like that. It's okay to resist things like racism and sexism and homophobia and, all these other things, but in deference to creating good doctors and good doctors that can be responsive to patients. So again, it needs to unfold in on itself, because that is the job of the physician as healthcare professionals. It's about the patients. So it's absolutely in there.
And maybe just a follow-up question. How do you conceptualize when you need to resist what patients are advocating for?
Give me an example of that.
So one of the big issues that I do, we have patient advocates who advocate strongly for real-time access to their data, for example, and e-patient Dave is a good example in the United States. A lot of people felt like they needed to resist that and speak out against it, and so there you have an issue where patients are advocating for something that they think is fundamental, and you have another group of people who are saying we need to resist this, and sometimes it forms itself as a quiet resistance and sometimes as a more active. Not every physician resists that. In fact, they don't at all, but there are some people who feel like it's their responsibility to resist that.
Yeah. And so in those kinds of situations, because resistance can come from any direction, in situations like that, I think it's really about drilling down around why they want their patient data. What is it that's going to give them that they don't have already? And are there alternatives that, solutions that both parties will agree is acceptable? And so it's about getting to like fundamentally what is it that what need is not being met. And it could be that they don't feel like they're getting the care that they need, or that maybe the notes are too hurried and incomplete, and those kinds of things. And so I feel like it's an opportunity to then reflect back on the system to say, our patients, the people, our clients, the people that we're responsible to are asking us to reflect on our practices, and we need to do that. So how are we going to go about creating this change? So I feel like it's an opportunity to get to a place of improvement on some level. So, I was just going to say thank you. So I just wanted to say thank you for being here today and engaging with me and to answering my questions. I don't want this to be the end of this conversation. Not today, not ever. I want to continue to talk about this because I think we're at this point where everybody is hurting, whether you are the resistor or you are being resisted, or you're witnessing resistance, or you want to resist and you can't because you are too afraid, all of these things. So I just want to invite you to continue to stay open to these conversations so that we can find a way forward. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Tasha. I think you can tell from the engagement in the room that people are really interested in this work, and that carried on our fine tradition of thought-provoking, engaging Hodges Symposium's talks. So I'm personally very grateful for your comments and your ability to be here with us today. Folks, don't all mob Tasha at once. Give her a bit of a break. I know she has some meetings and other things to do too. So, give her some space, but I'm sure she'd be happy to continue the conversation either in person or virtually if you're so interested. So this brings us to the end of our formal plans for Hodges Symposium. We've had to pivot a little bit with our agenda. So what follows next is officially the break, but also then it goes into the networking event. And we've heard your feedback in the past that you do not like structure when we do networking, that people just want to talk and have the opportunity to engage with their friends and colleagues that they may not have seen. So really, this is the last you're going to hear from me. We have the room till 12. There are refreshments, coffee, and all of you in the room. So feel free to connect, talk amongst yourselves, enjoy the rest of the day with us. It's such a rare opportunity for all of us to be together at once. So my thanks to you and Tasha and everybody else for attending, and have a wonderful rest of the event. Take care.